Nothing more than 90 scenes. In the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire stood as a colossus astride 3 continents, a testament to unparalleled military might and cultural brilliance. At its zenith, under the rule of Suleiman the Magnificent, its dominion stretched from the gates of Vienna to the shores of the Persian Gulf, and from the sands of North Africa to the heart of the Caucasus. Istanbul, the imperial capital, was the wealthiest and most sophisticated city on earth, a dazzling hub of art, science, and commerce. The Ottoman armies were the most disciplined and technologically advanced in the world, striking fear into the hearts of European monarchs. The empire's navy, commanded by legendary admirals, dominated the Mediterranean Sea. This was a golden age, a period when the crescent banner seemed destined to fly over the entire known world, an era of absolute power and seemingly limitless potential. Yet, from this dizzying height, a long, slow, and inexorable decline would begin, a multi-century unraveling that would see the empire crumble from within and without. The seeds of decline were sown even as the empire celebrated its greatest triumphs. Following the death of Suleiman the Magnificent in 1566, a succession of less capable sultans ascended to the throne. The rigorous tradition of princes gaining experience by governing provinces was abandoned, replaced by a system where potential heirs were confined to the palace, in a section known as the cage. This practice, intended to prevent civil wars, instead produced rulers who were inexperienced, isolated from the realities of governance, and easily manipulated. They lacked the ambition, vision, and ruthless competence of their forebears. The strong, centralized leadership that had been the bedrock of Ottoman strength began to erode, creating a power vacuum at the very heart of the empire. This gradual weakening of the Sultanate was the first crack in the mighty edifice, a subtle but profound shift that would have devastating consequences in the centuries to come. As the Sultan's authority waned, power seeped into the shadowy corridors of the Topkapi Palace. A new era of palace politics began, dominated by factions vying for influence. The valid sultan, the mother of the reigning sultan, often became the de facto ruler, wielding immense power through her control of the imperial harem and her influence over her son. This period, known as the Sultanate of Women, saw powerful female figures and their allies, the chief eunuchs and grand viziers, engage in complex and often deadly intrigues. Decisions were no longer based on the strategic needs of the state, but on personal ambition, rivalries, and the preservation of factional power. Corruption became endemic. High offices were sold to the highest bidder, regardless of merit, leading to incompetence and mismanagement throughout the imperial administration. The intricate machinery of the state, once a model of efficiency, began to rust and seize, paralyzed by bribery and internal strife. The decay at the center of the empire inevitably spread to its military, the very institution that had forged its greatness. The Janissaries, once the elite, invincible shock troops of the Sultan, began to lose their edge. Originally a disciplined corps of slave soldiers forbidden from marrying or engaging in trade, they gradually won concessions that eroded their military discipline. They were allowed to marry, have children, and enroll their sons into the corps, transforming it from a meritocratic fighting force into a privileged, hereditary caste more interested in protecting its perks than in fighting the empire's wars. They became a powerful political force in Istanbul, frequently meddling in palace politics and launching revolts to depose sultans or viziers who threatened their interests. Their refusal to adopt new military technologies and tactics, viewing them as a threat to their traditional role, left the Ottoman army dangerously outmatched by the rapidly modernizing armies of Europe. The sharp sword of the empire had grown dull. While internal rot weakened the empire, profound economic shifts were undermining its foundations. For centuries, the Ottomans had controlled the lucrative trade routes between Europe and Asia, filling the imperial coffers with taxes and tariffs. However, the European age of discovery fundamentally altered the global economic landscape. Portuguese, Dutch, and English navigators pioneered new sea routes around Africa, bypassing Ottoman territories altogether. This shift in trade diverted the immense wealth of the spice and silk trades away from the Middle East and directly into the ports of Western Europe. Simultaneously, a massive influx of silver from the Americas flooded into Ottoman markets, causing runaway inflation that devalued the currency and crippled the economy. Local artisans and merchants could not compete with cheaper, mass-produced European goods. The economic engine of the empire began to sputter, starved of the commerce that had long been its lifeblood. The intellectual and technological dynamism that had once characterized the Ottoman state began to stagnate. While Europe was experiencing the seismic transformations of the Renaissance, the scientific revolution, and the Enlightenment, the Ottoman Empire largely turned inward. A powerful conservative clerical establishment resisted innovation, viewing European advancements with suspicion and hostility. The first printing press in the empire, for example, was not established until the 18th century, centuries after its invention in Europe, and its use was heavily restricted. This failure to embrace and adapt to the new ideas and technologies sweeping the West had dire consequences. In science, industry, administration, and military organization, the empire fell further and further behind its European rivals. The gap, once a narrow stream, had widened into an unbridgeable chasm. The Ottomans found themselves in a new and terrifying world, armed with outdated tools and antiquated ideas. By the 19th century, the once mighty empire was derisively known as the sick man of Europe. Its weakness was a glaring invitation for a foreign interference. The great powers of Europe, Britain, France, Russia, and Austria-Hungary began to circle, each eager to carve out spheres of influence and seize territory from the decaying state. This Eastern question dominated European diplomacy for a century. Russia sought to expand southward to control the strategic Turkish Straits, while Britain and France sought to prop up the empire just enough to prevent a Russian takeover that would upset the balance of power. Foreign powers imposed a series of humiliating treaties and economic concessions known as capitulations, which gave their citizens and merchants special privileges, exempting them from Ottoman laws and taxes. The empire lost control over its own finances, becoming heavily indebted to European banks. Internally rising nationalist movements among the empire's diverse ethnic and religious groups, often fueled and supported by European powers, began to tear the multi-ethnic fabric of the state apart, with Greece, Serbia, Bulgaria, and others fighting for and winning their independence. The final, fatal blow came with the outbreak of World War I in 1914. Miscalculating their chances, the Ottoman leadership, under the control of the three Pashas, made the disastrous decision to ally with the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary. The war was a catastrophe for the already weakened empire. It fought a grueling multi-front war against the Allied powers, including Britain, France, and Russia, in the Caucasus, Mesopotamia, Gallipoli, and Palestine. The conflict exhausted its remaining resources, decimated its population, and exposed the utter bankruptcy of its leadership. The brutal Armenian genocide, a systematic campaign of deportation and extermination, further stained the empire's final years. By 1918, the Ottoman armies were shattered. The Armistice of Mudros signaled a complete and unconditional surrender. The victorious allies moved to occupy Istanbul and partition the empire's remaining territories, leaving only a small Anatolian heartland for the Turkish people. The great state of Suleiman was reduced to a rump state under foreign military occupation. Out of the ashes of imperial collapse, a new nation was forged. The Allied plan to dismember Anatolia sparked a fierce backlash, leading to the Turkish War of Independence. Led by a brilliant and charismatic army officer, Mustafa Kemal, Turkish nationalist forces organized and fought back against the occupying powers and their proxies. Over 3 years of brutal fighting, they drove out foreign armies and secured the sovereignty of a new Turkish homeland. In 1922, The last vestiges of the old order were swept away. The Ottoman Sultanate, an institution that had endured for over 600 years, was officially abolished. The last Sultan, Mehmed VI, fled into exile aboard a British warship. The following year, the Republic of Turkey was proclaimed, with Mustafa Kemal, who would later be given the honorific title Ataturk or Father of the Turks, as its first president. The long, agonizing decline of one of history's greatest empires had finally reached its end, closing a chapter that had spanned 6 centuries and giving birth to the modern Middle East, nothing more than 90 scenes.